If I already know how to make bread and love the whole process, why in the world did we just buy a bread machine? Hi, I'm Nika Waters and welcome to the Boat Galley podcast. Today I'm sharing some of the reasons that we actually bought a bread machine for Calypso, even though at first glance it doesn't seem to make too much sense. Today's episode of the Boat Galley podcast is sponsored by Mantis Marine, maker of the Mantis Anchor, now available in models with and without a roll bar. Proven to set reliably in the most challenging bottoms, the Mantis Anchor digs like no other, making anchoring safer and boating more enjoyable. Mantis Marine brings to market practical, durable, and affordable marine products, including anchoring gear, scuba diving accessories, and a rechargeable waterproof headlamp for hands-free lighting. Visit mantismarine.com and see for yourself. That's MantusMarine.com. I remember when we first had the boat and I had learned how to make bread and we had people over for dinner and I served them fresh bread and the woman looked around the boat. I saw her kind of peeking around and glancing around and I said, "What are you looking for?" She said, "Well, where's your bread machine?" And I wiggled my hands. And for a lot of years, I didn't think a bread machine was worth the space or the time that it took up. Making bread is easy. It doesn't take long. The time that bread takes is the time that it needs to rise. It's not something that needs a lot of hands-on attention. And it's a great way to be creative. I learned how to make bread by first following Lynn Party's recipe in The Care and Feeding of the Sailing Crew. And after a couple of false starts, I got pretty good at making my own bread. And yeah, this was long before the pandemic and everybody making sourdough bread. I love homemade bread. In fact, it's been a really long time since we've bought any bread. It's just easier to carry flour and yeast and go on my merry way. And once upon a time, I did have a bread machine. I think I got a bread machine when the kids were little. I think I was looking at a picture of our old kitchen and there was a bread machine sitting on the counter. And bread machines have not evolved that much actually from the early 1990s when I very first had one and then gave it away and then got another one in the early 2000s. At their core, bread machines are a one-focus appliance. They take up counter space and they chew electricity. I can make better tasting bread, particularly the crust, with a multi-purpose bowl and a single loaf pan. So why in the world did we just buy a bread machine? We're still sailing on a small boat and storage space is still at a premium, but there are two main reasons why we bought a bread machine. One of them is self-sufficiency. Yeah, bear with me a second. And one of them is heat. And both of those have to do with the stove. I love the stove that we have. It's a 3-burner oven and broiler, propane-fueled Force 10 stainless steel unit that we've had for this particular model. We've had for probably 15 years. I use that stove at least 2 and more often 3 meals a day. And the biggest problem with it is that the oven is basically uninsulated. And I don't know why people can't make a good marine stove with an insulated oven, but that's a whole different conversation. But when you use the oven, you put a huge amount of heat into the cabin, which is awesome if it's cold out, except for the condensation challenges. But that's, again, a whole other conversation. It's a little less wonderful when it's already 90 degrees in the shade. And given that our plan is to spend time cruising in warmer parts of the world, on a budget that leans towards the make my own bread side of the equation, hint, if you've been to the Bahamas and bought bread there, you know what I mean. It's great to think about finding ways to actively reduce heat generation. Propane is also one boat item that you cannot manufacture yourself. There's no propane maker like there is a water maker. There's no solar panel that makes propane. And if you're dependent on propane, you will need to source it wherever you happen to be when you run out. You can't take propane to fuel yourself for years of cruising. You just can't do it. And according to more than a few people that we know, though it's not impossible, and they've all managed to do it using different methods, filling propane tanks around the world can be one of those cruising challenges that most people back home will never, ever believe. It's one of those hidden challenges with cruising life. If it takes you all day to fill a propane tank, hard for somebody back home where all you have to do is drive to the local 7-Eleven and exchange one tank for another one. You can't do that when you're cruising. But among the upgrades that we've done to Calypso are a new lithium battery setup and a 1200 watt inverter, plus the solar panels that we're busy creating the support structure for. Power generation, check. We're not going to go full electric. That's not in the plans for a whole host of reasons, but we will have enough power to power a bread machine. A bread machine uses not a ton of power in the long run, actually, because it's really only on while it's cooking the bread. There's a little bit while it's kneading, but most of the time that the bread machine is quote unquote on, it's not using a lot of power. It takes up space for sure, and it will live stashed up front. That's one of the things where we're going with just the two of us. We don't have four of us to consider things. So it will live stashed up front, which when we change the way we've laid out the boat, up front used to be our sleeping space, and it's not anymore. So it's going to be much more of a storage area. We'll pull it out when we need bread, or if I don't have the oven already going for something else. And if it turns out that we don't use it, it will get passed along to somebody else. But we may well fall in love with the convenience and lack of heat generation down below. And in that case, it will be a very good purchase indeed. I will keep you posted. Side note, as I'm recording this, the bread machine is actually whirring away, making a batch of bread. I'm trying to figure out my own personal recipes and scale them down to bread machine size. One of the things that I can play with on the bread machine is picking different cycles, and I need to spend some more time reading the different definitions, but I know that the first couple of loaves we made, we didn't love the crust and we didn't really love the crumb. Yeah, and this is bread making problems 101. But I'm testing out different cycles, even if they're not the ones that would make sense. So I've got a whole wheat loaf that's going, but I'm doing it on the sweet cycle because the sweet bread that I made yesterday, we liked the crumb of. We'll see how it works. So when you share an anchorage with us down the line, I'll bring out fresh bread and we can decide if it's homemade or in the bread machine. Thank you so much for listening to the Boat Galley podcast. We love hearing from our listeners. There's an email for either me or Carolyn in the show notes. And we also love it when you subscribe and you tell your friends about us. Have the most spectacular week.